Some pains don't come from the truth. They come from the quiet ghosts of doubt that follow you everywhere. And in this video, we walk into the fragile space between trust and fear, where every glance, every silence, every late reply becomes a question you're scared to answer. When love feels uncertain, your mind begins to write stories darker than reality. And sometimes the doubt you imagine hurts far more than anything he has ever done. The first shadow continued. The first shadow didn't appear loudly. It didn't come as a confession, a message, or a sudden change in his eyes. It arrived the way evening light slips into a room, so quietly that you don't notice the darkness until you're already standing in it. First, it was nothing. A pause before he answered a simple question. A smile that looked practiced instead of warm. A phone turned over on the table, screen facing down. Small things, harmless things, things you tell yourself not to misread. But doubt is a patient creature. It knows how to wait, how to feed on little moments until it becomes something with teeth. And the truth is, I didn't want to be that person. The woman who analyzes every breath he takes. The woman who fears her own imagination. The woman who watches love through a microscope until all she can see are cracks. Yet that night, when he walked through the door, the shadow followed him inside. He looked the same, but something felt borrowed. His voice was warm but carried a weight I couldn't name. His kiss touched my forehead, but didn't reach my heart. It was like standing next to someone you know intimately, and suddenly realizing you can't read their silence anymore. The shadow grew stronger when I caught myself wondering, why does he seem far away even when he's right here? What conversation is living in the back of his mind? Who does he think about when his eyes go dim like that? Doubt whispered quietly, "Look closer. Something is shifting," but my heart whispered back, "Don't ruin this with fear." So I stayed still. I stayed quiet. I pretended I wasn't drowning in questions. But that was the beginning, the moment the first shadow moved between us. And once it appeared, nothing ever felt the same again. The second shadow. The second shadow didn't come from him. It came from me. It arrived on an ordinary morning, when the world felt too quiet and my heart felt too loud. I watched him pour his coffee the way he always did, 2 sugars, no hesitation. And yet, somehow that familiar movement felt foreign, like I was watching a stranger wearing the body of the man I loved. I tried to smile at him. He smiled back. But something inside me tightened instead of softening. It was the kind of moment you can't explain to anyone, not even to yourself. A moment where your intuition whispers something your mind refuses to accept. That morning, I caught myself studying him the way someone studies a photograph that has been edited. Everything looks normal, but something is off and you can't unsee it. And that's when the second shadow settled in. The shadow of my own fear. I wondered when it had begun to change shape. When healthy awareness turned into quiet suspicion. When paying attention turned into collecting evidence. When love became something I felt the need to protect instead of something I simply lived inside. I hated it. I hated the way doubt rewired my instincts. I hated how easily my mind could rewrite a perfectly ordinary moment into a warning. He touched my shoulder, warm, familiar, safe. But instead of melting, I froze, as if the contact itself was something I had to decode. He asked, "Are you okay?" And I said the oldest lie in the world. "Yes. Just tired." But what I meant was, I'm scared of the story my heart is starting to tell me. I'm scared that the distance I feel is real, not imagined. I'm scared that you're slipping away, and I don't know how to hold on without tightening my grip too much. That day, I realized something painful. Sometimes the worst shadows in a relationship don't come from betrayal. They come from the quiet war between your intuition and your hope, between what you sense and what you desperately wish wasn't true. And once that war begins, there's no going back to the version of you who never questioned anything. The third shadow, the moment everything tilted. It happened on a rainy evening in Copenhagen. The kind of rain that blurs streetlights into streaks of gold and silver, making the world feel both beautiful and impossibly fragile at the same time, that we sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. Steam rose from our mugs, curling like smoke signals from another life, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I felt truly relaxed around him. The third shadow appeared quietly at first. A look, a hesitation, the kind of pause that carries weight heavier than any accusation. That I saw it in the way he avoided my eyes when I asked about his day. The words didn't sound wrong, but something inside me whispered, something is not being said. That I tried to ignore it, to cling to the warmth of our routine, but the doubt had grown into something almost alive, circling the room, circling my heart, feeding on every small sign, every minor inconsistency. And then it happened. A simple question, so ordinary, yet it tipped everything over. Did you call your friend today? He froze. A small human pause, one that could have meant nothing, but my mind spun it into 100 different scenarios. Was it a lie? Was he hiding something bigger? Was I imagining it? The heart doesn't ask for evidence. It reacts to shadows, and in that instant my heart screamed louder than any logic. The trust we built is cracking. That I felt my own emotions tilt like the uneven streets outside, sliding from calm into fear, from warmth into suspicion. That I wanted to accuse, to demand truth, but even in that desire I feared the outcome. Because once you open the door to doubt, you can't be sure whether you're uncovering reality or creating it. We sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, while the rain kept tapping against the window like impatient fingers. That night, I learned a brutal truth. Sometimes a single question, a single pause, can cast a shadow longer than the brightest day, and in that shadow, everything feels as if it's tilting. Your heart, your trust, your entire sense of safety. It was the moment I realized that the shadow was no longer just a visitor. It had moved in. The spiral of overthinking. Once the third shadow settled in, my mind became its own labyrinth. Every glance, every word, every pause. Suddenly they weren't just ordinary moments. They were clues to a story I wasn't sure existed. Yet my brain insisted on telling anyway. I would replay conversations in my head, turning simple greetings into hidden messages, small jokes into secret warnings. I imagined what he might be hiding, who he might be thinking about, what decisions he might have made without me knowing. It was exhausting. The more I tried to reassure myself, the louder the spiral became. Logic seemed powerless, evidence didn't matter. All that mattered was the feeling, the gnawing doubt that refused to leave. I started noticing things I never did before. The way he smiled at his phone, the extra minutes it took him to answer, the way he sometimes glanced away when I entered the room. Each tiny detail became a thread, and my imagination wove it into a web. I was both prisoner and architect of my own fear. Psychologists say overthinking is a way our brains try to control uncertainty. It feels productive, like solving a puzzle, but it's actually a trap. Your mind builds stories so convincing, you begin to confuse fiction with reality. And that's what happened to me. I was creating scenarios that might never happen, imagining betrayals that weren't real, listening to every silence as if it were a confession. The irony? He hadn't changed. Nothing about him had shifted. It was me. My doubts, my fear, my obsession with being prepared for pain that cast the longest shadows. I realized something crucial. Doubt is contagious, not just in relationships but inside your own mind. Once it sneaks in, it multiplies, making ordinary life feel like a suspense movie where you are both the hero and the villain. By the end of that week, I knew I had to choose. Either surrender to the spiral, or confront the shadows before they consumed my love completely. And that choice was harder than any conversation I had ever faced. Facing the truth. The next evening, I decided it was time. No more spirals, no more silent fears. I had to face the truth, whatever it was. Before it swallowed us both, we sat on the balcony, Copenhagen lights shimmering below us like scattered stars, and I felt my chest tighten with every heartbeat. I had rehearsed my words countless times in my head, but now, facing him, every plan evaporated. I need to ask you something. I began, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, patient, attentive, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. Have you been hiding anything from me? The words hung between us, heavier than the night. My stomach twisted as I watched his reaction. He hesitated, and I felt my mind race. This is it. The moment I imagined 1,000 times. The truth. Or the end. Then he spoke, softly, honestly, without drama. No. I've never hidden anything from you. I know you've been worrying, and I understand why, but it's all in your head. Nothing has changed. Nothing is being kept from you. I blinked, disoriented. Everything I had feared, all the stories my mind had invented, collapsed in that single moment. It was not a cinematic revelation, not a dramatic confession. It was simple. A truth that was ordinary and mundane, yet it carried more power than any imagined betrayal. And then it hit me. The shadows were never his, they were mine, created by doubt, fueled by fear, and made terrifying by my unwillingness to trust myself. And him. I wanted to cry, to release all the tension, the anxiety, the imagined treacheries. Instead, I just sat there, taking a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his hand on mine, and letting the silence speak louder than any suspicion ever could. That night, I learned a profound lesson. Facing the truth is not about confrontation, it's about letting go of the stories you've been telling yourself, and choosing to see what is actually there, not what you fear. Sometimes, the hardest person to convince isn't the one you loved, it's yourself. And as we watched the city lights flicker below, I realized the shadows were finally beginning to dissolve. Rebuilding trust. The morning after our conversation felt like waking up in a new city. Not because Copenhagen had changed. Its cobblestones, its canals, its quiet corners were the same. But because I had changed, the weight of doubt, the shadows I had carried for weeks, had begun to lift, leaving space for something fragile but real, trust. Rebuilding trust is not dramatic. It does not happen in one conversation or a single gesture. It is a quiet, daily choice. It is noticing how he smiles when he wakes up, how he remembers small details about my day, how he holds space for me when my mind begins to wander into fear again. I realize that trust requires courage, the courage to believe in what you see, not in what you fear. It requires patience, to watch someone you love over time, to allow their actions to speak louder than your imagination. And it requires self-compassion, to forgive yourself for letting shadows take hold, and for giving doubt a power it never truly had. That week, I started small rituals. We began sharing our thoughts at night, even the minor ones that seemed trivial, because openness became our strongest shield against the shadows. We laughed at mistakes, admitted misunderstandings, and gradually, the space between us felt warmer, safer, more alive. I also learned a critical personal lesson. Trusting someone else begins with trusting yourself. Your intuition is valuable, yes, but it can be clouded by fear, by anxiety, by overthinking. Learning to distinguish between real warning signs and imagined shadows is part of the work of love. By the end of that week, I noticed something extraordinary. I was smiling more freely. That I could sit beside him without anticipating the next word. I could hear his words without translating them into hidden meanings. The shadows had not disappeared entirely. They never really do. But they had been tamed, softened, made small, and in that softness, trust found its place again, quietly, steadily. Like sunlight returning to a room after a storm. That I realized that relationships, like hearts, are resilient. They bend under pressure but can bend back. They survive doubt, suspicion, and fear, not because shadows are gone, but because the choice to love and to trust is stronger than the darkest whisper in your mind. The unexpected truth. A few days later, something unexpected happened. It wasn't a confession, a confrontation, or a dramatic revelation. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable if you weren't paying attention. But for me, it spoke louder than any words ever could. He left a note on the kitchen counter, written in his careful handwriting. I've noticed your doubts. I love you even when shadows visit. Let's be honest with each other always. I picked it up slowly, feeling the paper tremble in my fingers. It was simple, ordinary, yet it carried the weight of understanding, the quiet proof that he had been aware of my inner struggles all along, and had chosen patience over frustration, empathy over defensiveness. That moment, I realized the unexpected truth. Love is not just about moments of passion or drama. It is often about the quiet, unnoticed acts of care that arrive when you are too tired, too afraid, or too lost in your own thoughts to see them. That evening, I watched him wash the dishes, a task he always considered mundane, and I saw it differently now. Every movement, every habit, every ordinary action was a thread in the fabric of our trust. And then I understood something even deeper. The shadows I had feared so much were never about his actions, they were about my fear of losing what I held dear. And the unexpected truth was this. He had been loving me in ways I hadn't recognized, quietly, steadfastly, patiently, through every pause, every silence, every mundane act of being present. That night, we sat together, talking about nothing and everything, and I felt the tension in my chest release a little more with every word. I learned that love's power is often found in patience, in observation, in small truths that unfold slowly but inevitably. Sometimes, the most profound revelations come not in grand gestures, but in the subtle, consistent proof that someone truly sees you, even when your own mind struggles to see yourself clearly. And I realized that the shadows don't disappear. They only lose their power when we open ourselves to see the unexpected truths hiding in plain sight. Finding peace. The days after that unexpected truth felt lighter, almost surreal. The shadows that had haunted my thoughts, tilting my heart and mind, were still there, but they no longer controlled the room, the conversation, the rhythm of our lives. That I began to notice the small moments of peace, the quiet laughter over morning coffee, the gentle touch as he passed me in the hallway, the shared glances that needed no words. It was in these moments that I realized peace is not the absence of shadows. It's the presence of understanding, trust, and acceptance. I learned that love is not a perfect shield against doubt. It does not erase the fears we carry, nor does it prevent the mind from wandering into what-ifs. But love, when nurtured with patience and honesty, allows those fears to exist without letting them dictate your actions or your happiness. That week, I sat quietly on the balcony, watching the lights of Copenhagen reflect in the canal below. I thought about the weeks of doubt, the sleepless nights, the spirals of overthinking. And I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I had learned to navigate the shadows, to see them, acknowledge them, and then let them pass. I also realized the most profound lesson. True peace comes from within, not from another person. Trusting someone else begins with trusting yourself, your feelings, your intuition, and your ability to face uncertainty without being consumed by it. By choosing to face my fears instead of running from them, I had reclaimed my heart. I had reclaimed my voice. I had reclaimed my love, not just for him, but for the life we were building together, and for myself. And as we shared a quiet evening, talking and laughing softly, I understood that shadows will always exist, but they only define us if we let them. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and felt the calm settle in like a gentle tide washing over me. The journey through doubt had been difficult, exhausting, and at times terrifying, but in the end I found peace, and that peace was stronger than any shadow that ever crossed my heart.